Welcome to Transcendent. I'm Raya and I'm the daughter.
And I'm Joe, and I'm the dad.
Dad, do you know what they call a group of crows?
Well, sure, they call it a murder of crows.
Right. Now, do you know in order to have a murder of crows, there must be probable cause?
Cause. This is an interesting time in our history as we're talking about what is a woman. That really has been changing over the years. When I go back to think 20 years ago, you and I both worked with someone who was transgender.
We never harassed her or anything,
No,
but we also felt like she was not really a woman like the other women there. And it didn't really matter because the job didn't matter what gender you were. But we sort of felt like she's not really fitting in like we feel like she ought to.
to me, it was like playing a game. It was like dressing up, making believe you're somebody that you know you're not.
In our culture, there's a lot of people talking about transgender issues right now, and it gets narrowed down to this question of what is a woman? Now, I myself am transgender. I transitioned about 10 years ago. So this is a really important discussion and question for me. But we thought that we would address this specific episode to the folks that are not convinced, that are where we were 15 or 20 years ago, that are thinking, this sure seems like playing dress up. And it's just kind of a game. We also want to address this podcast to those people that are allies that are having conversations with people in the wider culture that are saying, I don't know that I buy this. How do we have those conversations? And how do we have them in a healthy way? I passed a political sign, this was a few months ago, where they said, vote for our political party. They may not be perfect, but the other side is insane. And I thought, people on both sides are saying that about the other side right now. We feel like my side doesn't have it all together. I completely get that. But the people on the other side are really out to lunch. And I would like to be a voice that helps us to get past that. So we figured as we would have this episode, that we are not treating people who are skeptical towards transgender issues as being antagonistic. I don't think generally that they are. I think in general, it's like, this doesn't make sense. This seems like you're really out to lunch here. And I get that because that's how I used to feel. On face value, the statement that a man can become a woman sounds utterly absurd, doesn't it?
It does.
Right? And if that's your starting point, then of course, opposition to any trans inclusive policies seems like, well, that makes a lot of sense. Why would I want to include transgender women into the category of women if it's really just a man dressing up? If it's really just a game? If it's really just somebody pretending? Do you remember this clip this was actually a couple years ago now, when they were doing the confirmation hearings for Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, and Senator Marsha Blackburn questioned her about her definition of the word woman. We want to play that clip for you right now.
Can you provide a definition for the word woman?
Can I provide a definition?
Mm-hmm.
No.
Yeah.
I can't.
You can't?
Not in
Okay.
this context.
So
I'm not a biologist.
The meaning of the word woman is so unclear and controversial that you can't give me a definition?
Senator, in my work as a judge, what I do is I address disputes. If there's a dispute about a definition, people make arguments, and I look at the law and I decide.
Well,
so I'm not.
The fact that you can't give me a straight answer about something as fundamental as what a woman is underscores the dangers of the kind of progressive education that we are hearing about.
You hear right in her language, there's something dangerous about this, that the simple dictionary definition of a woman is adult female human. And if we define female as specifically related to your reproductive role, then it just seems like an open and shut case. To deviate from that is not just misguided, but it's dangerous. And it's kind of used as this gotcha moment in the political discourse. I understand that, right? We think about what are all these bad things that could happen. What about a man dressing as a woman and walking into the bathroom? What about male bodied people playing in sports? What about these worst case scenarios and how bad things would be? Well, we sometimes talk about the response that gender is the social part and then reproduction is the physical part, and those two are separate. You might sometimes hear people say, gender is a social construct. And you think, come on, you have got to be kidding me. What do you mean gender is a social construct? Gender is real because, like anybody that has ever had a child, you know how babies are made. And you think gender is a social construct. You have got to be kidding me. But all we're really saying there is that there are social aspects that we key in on that are based in real life things that we have, right? You either are born with a certain reproductive anatomy or you're not. And yes, those are real things, but yet we've structured the entire way that we view other humans around these categories, but we could have very easily picked other categories.
Like the difference between left-handers and right-handers. Something you've probably never heard me say on this podcast. I kind of think, what would you think of that? Maybe we would have our own pronouns. How about lay lem for left-handed and ray ram for right-handed?
Right? Instead of like a they, them. That makes sense. And no, we should probably disclose to our audience one of us happens to be a left handed person.
However, both of your parents happen to be left-handers, and we're proud of it.
Yes.
Years ago, there were actually quite a few people who were nicknamed Lefty. That was not uncommon. Yeah, that people were called Lefty. There was a famous guy, Lefty Fresnel, something like that. And they also would call us Southpaw.
Oh, I've never heard that one.
Yeah, Southpaw. Hey, Southpaw. Yeah.
Now, imagine with those pronouns, we bring that up as a joke. But imagine instead of saying, oh, yeah, I met your dad, Joe, and he seems like a great guy. What if instead they said, I met your left handed parent,
Yeah.
Joe, and they seem like a great left hander? Now, imagine that every single time you referred to that person, our whole society was trained to the first question that we needed to answer when we met somebody is, are you a lefty or a righty? And I'm
Yeah.
going to treat you differently based on whether you are a lefty or a righty. And every time I refer to, I'm going to remind the other person whether you use your left hand or your right hand as your primary hand. That arbitrary distinction would reshape our entire social interaction. It would reshape our personal identities. It would change every conversation. We would group up naturally with people that shared our handedness. Imagine if every time you went shopping, I'd have to shop in the right handed section, but you'd get to shop in the left handed section. But I'd like to wear left handed clothes. And I really long to wear left handed clothes, but I can't because I'm a righty. You can see how it's based in something that's very real, but yet that entire thing would be socially constructed.
Well, suppose I decided to run for office. You know how it works in politics, where everybody looks for bad things in the opponent. And they could say, Joe is a left-hander. But can you really imagine yourself having a left-hander in Congress? I mean, what
I
do
don't know if
you
we're
think you
ready
can
for
do?
that.
I'm concerned. If you put one in there, they might change some of the laws and give themselves priority. We don't really need that. Oh, by the way, I thought of the guy, Lefty Frizzell.
Oh, good. S- So when we say that gender is a social construct, what we're saying is not that those gender distinctions are not real, but we're saying we as a society have trained ourselves to look at certain things and then to create an entire culture around it. And that culture is really arbitrary. Right now, we think of associating pink with girls and blue with boys. But 100 years ago or 150 years ago, those two colors were reversed. And there's nothing inherently that says boys should like this and girls should like this. There can be a natural tendency towards what boys generally like and what girls generally like, but there's nothing inherent about it. When we build a whole social expectation around the way that girls should behave and boys should behave, those things are made up. For those of us that don't feel like we fit in one side or the other, we just want to fit in on the other side.
If you take a look at people with pets, say dogs, cats, parakeets, do they ever consider because my dog is male, we have to treat it different than if my dog is female? They're often treated very much alike. They don't expect the male dog to eat more than the female dog. They don't expect the male cat to purr any louder than the female cat. They don't expect them to treat each other differently because of that. And in fact, many people don't even know the sex of their own parakeet.
Right? I think that there are some species where it probably matters more. All we're trying to say here is not that there's not a tendency one way or the other. If you try to tell me that most boys don't really like roughhousing, that's probably not true. If you look at all of the different societies, probably there's a tendency that boys do tend towards roughhousing. But that doesn't mean that all boys like roughhousing and no girls like roughhousing or anything like that. For somebody that feels like I match up with the other gender, you may or may not gravitate towards the gender cues that we normally associate with those things. It's a whole cluster of ideas, and you could be more or less stereotypical, but none of that matters. What we're talking about is for those of us that are transgender, we're saying the social cue for gender doesn't feel right to me. And then, of course, there's a whole group of people that say that whole idea of male or female categories, all of that feels yucky to me. And that's not saying that there's no such thing as real reproductive roles. It's saying that some of us feel yucky when you try to force us into those boxes that society requires for us, especially when you remind us every single time you use our pronoun, which box you're putting us into, and we say, forget it, stop making me feel yucky. Now, you might ask, what does a social construct actually look like in reality, and can we create them? Yes, we can.
For example, there was an experiment done in 1968 conducted by Jane Elliott. She divided third grade students into two groups, those who were blue eyed and those who were brown eyed. On the first day, she said all the blue eyed children are superior and all the brown eyed children were treated as inferior. Well, it didn't take long for those kids to accept their area, and the blue eyed children began to act superior. The students quickly internalized their assigned status, with the superior group performing better academically, but the inferior group experienced lower self esteem and decreased academic performance. That provides a vivid illustration of the psychological effects of discrimination in just one short day, how things could change like that.
So, we're going to talk about how that socially constructed role can come back to this question of what is a woman? We're going to give you our definition after this.
I'm Monica Scarbin. I love listening to the Transcendent podcasts, probably because I've been a guest speaker. I've been listening to these podcasts for over 2 years now and have found them to be not only inspirational, but very informative and emotionally lifting to my spirits, especially when I'm not feeling very hot. I'm a supporter and I'm glad to be a supporter. Please go to transcendent.com, click on support. By as little as $3 a month, you can cancel at any time.
Back in the 60s when I was in college, 1965, 66, 67, the fad was at that time for many of the guys in college to have long hair. So naturally, I had long hair. Also played in a rock band. And there's so many of the college kids had long hair that the older adults were concerned about it. They would say, it's terrible. You can't tell the guys from the girls. As a matter of fact, I'm not sure they can tell from each other who are the guys and the girls. I can remember the girls were always saying, trust me, Mom, we can tell. But that was one of those things that really was so defining at the time and so controversial. Just that one thing made it such a concern, not for the people who were doing it, but for the people who found it offensive.
It is interesting to me that many of the people who are most strict on their definitions of what constitutes a man or what constitutes a woman based on these quote unquote scientific categories are also the same people that are the quickest to say, well, you're not a real man because you wear your hair long. Real men drink real beer. And as soon as you break those gender norms, they're the quickest ones to say, well, you're not a real man. But as soon as a trans person says, actually, I'm not a real man, they say, well, how dare you say, yes, you are. You can't go against what nature says. I have heard some radical feminists that are saying, gender is completely terrible. Wouldn't it be great to live in a world where gender is completely done away with and everybody is treated exactly the same? I don't know about you, but my view is that as long as there are straight folks trying to make babies, gender is not going anywhere. Boys are always going to find ways to emphasize, I'm a boy and not a girl. So, how does this all work? I put together my own definition. This puts together what I hear folks in the trans community talking about of the way that gender is this socially constructed thing. And I came up with my own definition. So if a senator were to ask me, Raya, what is your definition of a woman? I would say a woman is someone who plays the social role or seeks to play the social role associated with female reproduction. So rather than these definitions of, well, a woman is anyone who says they're a woman, I think the idea with gender is that someone who is a woman is saying, yes, that social category associated with female reproduction that we've traditionally put together and we've all built up around this, I want to play that role. And a man is somebody who says, I want to play the role associated with male reproduction. And some people are non binary and they say, I don't want to play either of those roles. Or maybe I want to play both of those roles. Or I have some other relationship with those roles that doesn't fall into those traditional boxes. And all we're saying is, look, the vast majority of people are going to match up. The role that you are given to play is the same role that's associated with your reproductive role. And so you're completely fine with that. But A few of us out here on the margins don't sit right with those. Now, that part about playing a role, I would say that's really uncontested. If we say we're going to meet at 3 o'clock at such and such a restaurant, and you walk in and you say, I'm here to meet my daughter. Did she come here? She should be looking for me. And they would say, oh, sure, she's right over there. They would not be asking themselves, which reproductive role do I really play? And and if you were to come in and say, I'm here to meet my son, and you were to, oh, I see him over there, they would say, what are you talking about? That person over there is not a man. It would just be so strange.
Right.
Why? Because I have worked really, really, really hard to make sure that everything in my outward presentation indicates the social role associated with female reproduction. I've changed parts of my body. I've learned how to talk differently. I dress according to all of those things. And it would be very strange for somebody to look at me and not think anything other than that I am a woman. The contested part comes when we're dealing with people that are still trying to figure out how to pass or may never pass. Well, for those of us that are gracious, we would say, look, I understand everything that you're going through. And I can tell you're seeking to play the social role of this category over here. So I'm going to treat you that way. And all we're asking is, can we just treat one another the way that we would want to be treated and recognize that if somebody is not quite fitting in, that we would treat them the way that they want to be treated? That just mirrors our real world experiences. That when somebody says, this is who I feel most comfortable being, that we would treat them who they want to be.
That's what we should be doing all the time about everything. People should be treated as though they are what they say they are. They say if you want to be a success in something, imagine yourself there already. If you wanted to be a chef or something, once you in your mind become that, it becomes real.
Right. They say dress for the job that you want,
Yes.
not for the job that you have. And that's why I like to dress as Wonder Woman. Now, maybe you're saying, I hope we've done a good job and we've explained to you how folks in the transgender community think about gender and why we say the kinds of things we do. But maybe you're not convinced yet. And you're thinking that still is not right. I still think that a woman is somebody that has female reproductive capacity. That's all that it really means, and that's all that it ever can mean. Well, the problem is that that definition actually fails in all kinds of ways because many people that we all understand are women are actually excluded from that definition. For instance, what about a woman who's had a hysterectomy? By that definition, that a woman is somebody that has female reproductive capacity, they would be excluded from that. What about a woman after she's gone through menopause? Is she no longer a real woman because she no longer has that female reproductive capacity? What about women that were never born being able to have children? Are they not real women? What about intersex people? They've never been able to have children. We treat people as women without ever knowing their reproductive status. Even in ambiguous cases, we are very, very good at looking for social cues. Is this a man or is this a woman?
Is there a message here also for people in other areas, for the LGBTQ plus people? What can gays and lesbians and others learn from this particular podcast?
Well, I think we're talking a lot about social expectations and gender. I have a close friend who is a man, uses he, him pronouns, does not consider himself non binary at all, has always considered himself a man. And yet, the last time I saw him, he was wearing gorgeous high heels. He was wearing a fabulous fur coat. He wears amazing jewelry. He is not claiming that he's not a man. So what makes me a woman and him still a man? Ultimately, it comes down to the fact that even though he is violating all kinds of the expectations of what we would normally say go along with being a man, he's still, when you put it all together, saying, you know what role I play in society? I play the social role associated with male reproduction. And that's really all it comes down to. And it's okay to break those norms. Be who you are. You don't have to hide. But for some of us, when you use pronouns that remind us every single time you say it of which social role we play, that is the category that grates on us. And it feels like, but that's not right. It doesn't feel right. It's not who I am. Imagine you wanted to become an Olympic swimmer and you sacrificed everything. You got up early to go train. You would go after school to train. On weekends, all you would be doing is swimming, and everything that you did was competition, swim competitions, and this and that, and everything was based on that. And then somebody came along and said, I don't think swimming even counts as a real sport. In one single sentence, they completely dismissed everything that you are. For trans people, it's been a very hard battle to be who we are, to become who we need to be. And when somebody uses the wrong pronouns for us or doesn't recognize us as the social role that we are choosing to play, they see us as who we used to be rather than who we are. It feels deeply, deeply dehumanizing. Like everything that we are and everything that we have given up to be who we are doesn't even matter and it doesn't even count. That's really, really hard.
Well, this is quite a message.
I think our takeaway here for everybody is that it's easy to miss the daily reality of transgender people, that we're just living our lives. And this definition helps us to navigate these real situations. And we can move beyond the edge cases to a place of understanding.
But you know what's never an edge case is this podcast.
Yes, that's right.
We encourage you to come back here again next week, just like last week, the week before, and 3 years ago. We're here every week.
Next week, we are going to be talking about how to go beyond politics to find common ground on trans issues. So we hope you'll come back for that one.
And with that, we'll see you Monday. And with that, we'll see you later.
What?
No. And with that, we'll see you Monday.